The whole bus went silent when the billionaire stepped aboard. Evelyn Lockwood, the woman whose name stood in steel letters across the tallest building in the city, was standing in the aisle of the 552 Route 12 in a charcoal coat that cost more than most of the passengers made in a month. Her security team waited on the curb. The regional transit director waited behind her. And the driver, the same driver who had threatened to put a tired single dad off this exact bus, could not make himself look up from the fare box. Evelyn walked past the empty seats. She walked past the man in the camel coat, whose confident smile died halfway up his face. She stopped in front of a man in a worn gray work jacket, with a little girl leaning against his shoulder, and in front of 40 strangers, one of the most powerful women in the country reached down and took his rough, chapped hands in both of hers. "You're the man who warmed my mother's hands," she said. "I have been looking for you for 11 days. The man blinked, the little girl sat up, and every passenger who had watched this man be humiliated all winter began to understand that they had been riding, morning after morning, through a story none of them had bothered to see. If you already feel it, that tightening in your chest, hit the like button and subscribe to Hidden Ledger. Drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Because this story is just getting started. And the part they don't see coming? Keep watching. To understand that morning, you have to go back to the first week of December, when the cold came down early and decided to stay. Caleb Rourke was 36 years old, and his life ran on a schedule with no slack in it anywhere. Up at 4:40, oatmeal on the stove at 5:05, out the door at 5:30 with his daughter Ivy half asleep against his side and her backpack on his other arm. The 552 Route 12 downtown, the early care program at Whitfield Elementary by 6:40, the transfer at 6th Street, and the service entrance of the Lockwood building by 6:58, where he pulled on a gray custodial shirt with his name stitched over the pocket and cleaned 40 floors of glass and marble for people who looked through him like he was part of the window. 2 winters earlier, Caleb had been somebody else. 8 years on an ambulance, a paramedic with steady hands and a reputation for staying calm when the radio got loud. Then Elena got sick, and 19 months of treatment took the house, the truck, the savings, and finally Elena herself. Night shifts don't work when you are the only parent a 5-year-old has left. So Caleb traded the ambulance for a mop and told himself that being home by 4 o'clock every day was a promotion. Most days, he believed it. Ivy was 7 now. He braided her hair on the bus every morning and never once got it straight. She told him it was abstract. Every Friday night he dropped $9 into a peanut butter jar on the kitchen counter labeled Spring Choir Trip in purple marker. It was the only line in the budget that existed purely for joy, and he guarded it like rent. The jar had been Elena's idea, back when the jar held grocery money and the future still looked long. Elena used to sing while she cooked, badly and on purpose, because it made Ivy laugh until she hiccuped. When Ivy came home in September and announced she had made the school choir, Caleb had walked straight to the cupboard, rinsed out the jar, and written the new label himself. $9 a week. Some promises you keep with money, because it is the only language the world will accept. The regular driver on Route 12 was a big, quiet man named Ray, who kneeled the bus for strollers without being asked, and gave slow legs the extra 3 seconds. Ray remembered which kids kept losing their mittens. Under Ray, Route 12 felt less like transportation and more like a small town that happened to move. And in late November, the town got a new resident. She rode Tuesdays and Fridays. A small woman in her 80s, in a gray wool coat gone thin at the elbows, carrying a leather handbag, older than half the passengers, with tiny gold initials pressed into one corner. VML. Some mornings her fare card read on the first try. Some mornings it read nothing at all, and she would stand at the box, apologizing to no one in particular, working the clasp of the handbag with fingers the winter had turned to wood. The bus decided what she was without asking. The polite word was confused. The words people muttered were worse. She told anyone who would listen that her husband Arthur used to build things downtown, that he had worked steel for 40 years, that her daughter worked in the tall glass building. A teenager smirked into his phone. A woman in scrubs studied her own shoes. Nobody asked which building. Nobody ever asks the question that could change everything, because nobody believes the answer will matter. Caleb noticed her the way he noticed everything, quietly and completely. 8 years on an ambulance teaches a man to read hands the way other people read faces. And on the first hard morning of December, her hands were wrong. Gray-white at the knuckles, stiff, pressed flat against her thighs the way people hold them when the cold has moved past complaining and into something dangerous. He didn't announce a thing. He moved Ivy to the window, guided the old woman into the seat above the heater vent, and took her hands in both of his. "You never rub cold hands," he told Ivy, low, a lesson and a distraction at the same time. "Rubbing tears cold skin. You cup them. You give them your warm. You wait." He cupped them. He breathed slow heat into the small cave of his fingers. He unscrewed his thermos, filled the lid with coffee, and folded her crooked fingers around it. It took 11 minutes. He rode the rest of the way with his own hands bare in his pockets, and if you had asked him about it, he would have looked at you like you were asking why he breathed. Her name was Miriam. By the second Tuesday, it was a rhythm. Ivy saved the heater seat with her backpack. Caleb had the thermos lid filled before Miriam reached it, and one gray morning, on the back of a paper transfer slip, Ivy drew 3 stick figures riding a bus under an enormous crayon sun and pressed it into the old woman's palm. "So your hands remember being warm," Ivy said. Miriam looked at that drawing for a long time. Then she opened the handbag and slid it into the inside pocket. "Next to Arthur," she said. By the third Tuesday, she was telling them stories. How she and Arthur had ridden this same route in 1967, back when it was the number 9, and the fare was 30 cents. How Arthur had proposed to her on a bus exactly like this one, in January, with hands so cold she made him put them in her coat pockets before she would answer him. How she had raised her daughter on transfers and library cards and day-old bread, in a 2-room apartment above a shoe repair shop, and never once felt poor until somebody told her she was. "My Evie used to sleep right there," she said one morning, nodding at the third seat, where Ivy sat curled against the window with her braid coming loose. Same seat, same little face. Girls who ride buses at dawn grow up knowing how to work. Ivy, half asleep, reached over and held the old woman's gloved hand, and the bus rolled on through the dark, and nobody watching would have guessed that a single sentence spoken in that aisle was worth more than every suit on board. The second Friday of December, the bus reached the end of the line at Cedar Hill, and Miriam did not stand up. She was looking out at the gates like they belonged to a city she had never visited. Caleb rode past his transfer without a word, walked her up the long path in the wind, and stood back at a respectful distance while she talked to a headstone. He clocked in 19 minutes late. The contract company logged it as a first occurrence, and the shift lead told him the new client rules left no room for stories. Caleb signed the form and said nothing. Some costs a man pays quietly, the way other men pay parking meters. Caleb learned her in pieces, the way you learn anyone on a bus. Tuesdays and Fridays she rode to the end of the line at Cedar Hill, where Arthur was buried. 54 years married. "He never once let my hands be cold," she told Ivy. Not once in 54 years. She refused cabs. She refused rides. "Arthur never had a driver," she said, chin lifted like a closed gate. "I'm not starting now." He noticed the other things too, the things his old life had trained him to catch. The Tuesday she called Ivy Evie and didn't hear herself do it. The Friday she wore one glove and had no memory of the other. The morning she stared at a street she had ridden past 100 times and asked when they had moved it. He started carrying a spare pair of work gloves in his lunch bag, size small. He never made it a moment. He just made sure. There was a man who boarded every morning at Lockwood Plaza in a camel-colored coat. 3rd row, aisle seat, cologne arriving before he did. His name, Caleb would learn later, was Whitaker, and he worked somewhere up in the glass. He stepped over Ivy's backpack like it had personally inconvenienced him. He called Caleb Chief. Once, watching Miriam struggle at the fare box, he said, "To no one, and to everyone, there are facilities for this." A few people laughed the way people laugh when they are relieved. Somebody else said it out loud. Caleb knew the coat from somewhere else. 2 weeks earlier, in the lobby he cleaned, the same man had dropped a full coffee on the marble, watched it spread, and said, "You missed a spot," while 2 junior men laughed on cue. Caleb mopped it without a word. There is a kind of man who tests the world to find out who has to take it, and Whitaker had decided Caleb was one of the people who had to take it. It was the most expensive mistake of his career, and he made it every single morning, at full volume, on camera. Because here is what nobody on Route 12 ever thought about. Every city bus carries cameras. 4 of them. They see everything. They forget nothing. And they had been watching all winter long. In the first week of January, Ray's shoulder finally gave out and went under a surgeon's knife, and Route 12 got a substitute named Denny. Denny had driven buses for 22 years and had been tired for 19 of them. He ran his route like a debt. Behind schedule was the only weather he noticed. Then the real cold arrived. 8 below, with wind like a blade. The second morning of the cold snap, Denny started pulling from the curb while Miriam was still 10 feet from the door, moving at the speed of an 84-year-old on ice. Caleb put his palm flat against the doors. "She's coming," he said. Denny stared at him in the mirror. From the third row, Whitaker sighed loudly enough to be a public announcement. "My meeting can't wait, Chief." Caleb kept his palm where it was, until Miriam's hand closed on the rail and helped her up the steps, and the bus pulled out 14 seconds behind a schedule nobody would remember by lunch. 14 seconds. Hold on to that number, because there are people in this story who decided a grandmother was worth less than 14 seconds, and every one of them was on camera when they decided it. On Tuesday the 14th of January, at 12 minutes past 6 in the morning, Miriam's card died at the box. Her fingers could not work the clasp. The handbag tipped, and her coins went down, quarters and dimes rolling along the corrugated floor of a public bus, while an 84-year-old woman lowered herself after them on one bad knee. "Pick it up or step off," Denny said. "I'm not a charity." From the third row, "Some of us pay to be on time." Whitaker had his phone half raised, filming, wearing the small smile of a man collecting content. Ivy's whole face became a question no 7-year-old should have to ask. Caleb knelt. He gathered every coin, one at a time, and set the handbag gently back on Miriam's arm. He tapped his own fare card twice. "She's with us," he said, and that was all he said. He worked his gloves onto her hands, finger by finger, walked her to the seat above the heater, and stood the rest of the ride with his hands bare in his pockets. Miriam looked up at him with wet eyes. "Arthur used to do that." "This isn't a warming shelter," Denny called back. Caleb didn't answer. His silence was not weakness. It was a man declining to explain daylight to someone who preferred the dark. If this story found its way to you, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Hidden Ledger posts new stories every week, and the one after this one is already waiting. Your support is what keeps the ledger open. At her stop, Miriam's knee would not take the steps alone, so Caleb walked her down and steadied her to the bench, and Route 12 left without him. He caught the next one, clocked in 22 minutes late, and signed the form for a second occurrence, while the shift lead avoided his eyes. "One more," the form said, in language dressed up as policy. That night, tucking Ivy in, he found her still awake, staring at the ceiling. "Why is it always her they're mean to?" she asked. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, choosing his words the way he used to choose them in the back of an ambulance. "Some people can only feel tall when somebody else is kneeling," he said. "You can't fix that for them. You just make sure you're never the reason anybody kneels." Ivy thought about it. "Except for coins," she said. "You can kneel for coins." "Except for coins," he agreed, and turned out the light. That Friday, the sky came down as sleet, and everything broke at once. Miriam boarded wrong. Anyone paying attention could have seen it. No card at all. Coat button crooked. Eyes moving too fast across windows she should have known by heart. She told the aisle that the streets had been changed in the night. Denny reached for his radio and said the words transit police and the word vagrant in the same breath, and the bus pretended very hard to be looking at its phones. Caleb paid her fare. Then he did the arithmetic every working parent knows by heart, the arithmetic of what a minute costs, and he chose. He did not get off at 6th Street. He called his supervisor from the back of the bus, heard the words, "third occurrence," through the phone, and rode all the way to the end of the line. He walked Miriam through the sleet under his one umbrella, her arm through his, to the iron gates of Cedar Hill. At the gates, her mind surfaced, clear and small. "My daughter built the glass tower," she said. "Evelyn Lockwood, like the sign. She doesn't know I take the bus. Don't tell her. She'll make it a whole thing, with drivers and doors and people paid to hold my elbow." Caleb half believed her. It made no difference either way. Before he left, he slipped a folded note into the handbag, underneath the crayon sun. If she is lost or cold, call Caleb, and his phone number. He closed her fingers around the umbrella handle and told her the gloves were hers to keep. At 11:40 that morning, in the service corridor of the Lockwood building, the contract manager terminated him for attendance. Whitaker happened through the lobby as Caleb turned in his badge and slowed down to enjoy it. "The bus hero," he said to the manager. "This is who's on your invoice?" Caleb laid the badge on the counter and walked out into the sleet. He did not argue. Men like Caleb never argue at the moment everyone expects them to. They wait. That night he moved the choir jar money to the light bill and told Ivy the spring trip had been moved to next year. Ivy said okay and pretended to believe him, because 7-year-olds protect their fathers too. What Caleb did not know was that across town, in a house with a gate, a search had already begun. Miriam had come home soaked at the hem and warm at the hands, wearing men's work gloves 3 sizes too big, holding a drawing she would not put down. Her daughter's security team had been driving the streets since dawn, and Evelyn Lockwood, who had built a 9-figure company out of a rented desk and her father's stubbornness, discovered that she could not do the one thing she wanted most in the world. She could not find a janitor. The phone number in the handbag had bled blue where the sleet had reached the ink. The last 2 digits were gone. Understand what Evelyn Lockwood had already tried. She had sent cars, and her mother had canceled them. She had hired a companion, and her mother had served the poor woman tea and dismissed her by Thursday. She had offered drivers, apartments, alarms, everything money could hold in its hands. She had offered everything except the one thing that was never on any invoice, which was a Tuesday morning of her own time on a city bus. Her mother had never asked for it out loud. Mothers of daughters who build towers rarely do. So she sat with her mother and collected the story in pieces, the way Caleb had. A man on the 552, a little girl who drew suns, coins on the floor, a driver, a camel coat. Then she called the transit authority, and the transit authority pulled the cameras. And at 2 in the morning, on the 40th floor of the building with her name on it, Evelyn Lockwood watched her mother's winter play back in 4 angles. She watched the coins fall. She watched a man in a gray jacket kneel. She watched him teach a child how to hold another person's cold in her hands. She watched her mother tell stories with her chin lifted, and she watched a little girl fall asleep in the 3rd seat on the right, the seat Evelyn had slept in herself, 50 years earlier, on this same route, when her father's hands smelled like steel and the fare was 30 cents. Somewhere around the 4th hour of footage, the CEO of Lockwood Capital stopped taking notes and simply sat in the dark with her hand over her mouth. She watched 11 weeks of small cruelties and smaller mercies, time-stamped, and then she froze the frame on the logo stitched to the man's work jacket, because the logo was hers. One phone call to the contractor later, she learned they had fired him, and she matched the write-ups to the footage, morning by morning. Every mark against his name was a morning he had stayed with her mother. She watched everyone else too. She watched Denny. She watched the camel coat at 6:12 on the 14th. She watched a nurse in scrubs almost stand up, twice, and sit back down. Then she found the one formal complaint ever filed about the substitute driver on Route 12, written by that same nurse, answered by no one. The ledger was all there. It had been there the entire time. All anyone had ever needed to do was look. 11 days after the sleet, on a hard, clear Friday, Route 12 pulled into Lockwood Plaza and did not pull back out. There were black cars at the curb. The regional transit director boarded first, and the aisle straightened like a spine. Then she stepped up, and recognition moved through the bus like current, because her face had been on magazine covers and ribbon cuttings and the evening news. Denny's hands came off the wheel. Whitaker rose halfway, smoothing his coat, assembling a greeting, and she went past him like weather. She stopped at the man in the gray jacket with the little girl. "You're the man who warmed my mother's hands," Evelyn Lockwood said. Everyone else on this bus watched them freeze. The silence had a temperature. "Your mother," Caleb said slowly. "Miriam Lockwood," she said, and the name went down the aisle like the floor tilting. Denny turned gray. Whitaker's face performed the arithmetic of the signature on his own paycheck. The nurse in scrubs put a hand over her mouth. Ivy tugged the sleeve of the charcoal coat. "Is Miss Miriam okay?" Evelyn crouched to the height of a 7-year-old, which is something almost no one in her world had ever seen her do. "She's warm," she said. and she has been asking for the girl who draws suns. Caleb found his voice. Ma'am, I need you to know something. I didn't know whose mother she was. I knew her hands were cold. I've read your file, Mr. Rourke, Evelyn said. 8 years on an ambulance. I know exactly what you knew. What happened next did not take long, because consequences that have waited all winter tend to arrive efficiently. At the next stop, the transit director took the wheel section, and Denny was pulled from the route pending review, with the footage already logged. Evelyn asked Caleb, quietly, in the aisle, whether 22 years should end on that tape. Caleb looked at the driver's gray face for a moment. 22 years of dark mornings can make a man forget there are faces on this bus, he said. Retrain him. Everybody gets one seat by the heater. Evelyn looked at him the way you look at math that keeps coming out right. Then she turned to the third row. Mr. Whitaker. Her voice never rose. January 14th, 6:12 a.m. My legal team calls it conduct unbecoming a vice president. My mother just calls you the camel coat. There's a meeting waiting for you on the 9th floor. He stepped down onto the plaza in front of the same riders who had heard every joke he ever made, and his badge stopped working before he reached the doors. Nobody laughed the relieved little laugh. That currency was gone. Before she left the bus, Evelyn paused beside the woman in scrubs. You filed the only complaint, she said. It deserved an answer. It has one now. The nurse cried without a sound, and from that week on, she was always the first one standing. And then the repayment, which was the part Caleb tried to refuse. I'm not offering your job back, Evelyn said. The company that fired you no longer holds my contract. I'm offering you facilities operations lead for the building. Days, benefits, a desk with your name spelled correctly. Caleb started to shake his head, and she cut him off without raising her voice. It isn't a gift, Mr. Rourke. I checked 9 years of references. You are the most overqualified man in my building, and I own the building. A pause. One condition. Tuesdays off. My mother rides the 552 to Cedar Hill and refuses to take a car. She will, however, take company. By March, every bus on Route 12 had working heat. By fall, every bus in the city did. The transit authorities signed a cold weather policy that drivers now learn on their first day. The one that says no rider is refused in dangerous cold. And the training is led by a big quiet man named Ray, back from surgery, because the footage showed a driver who had kneeled his bus 400 times without being asked. They call the policy the Miriam Standard. Miriam thinks that's a lot of fuss over a heater. In February, a new clip crossed Evelyn's desk. Route 12, early morning. A retrained driver named Denny down on one knee in the aisle, picking up an old man's scattered coins. She watched it twice and filed it where she files settled accounts. In spring, Whitfield Elementary's choir sang, and the trip money was back in the jar where it belonged, $9 at a time, the way Caleb insisted. Front row, second seat, an 84-year-old woman in the same thin gray coat she still refuses to replace. New gloves folded in her lap, and beside her a billionaire who kept glancing sideways at her mother's hands. An old habit that was only a few months old. The first Tuesday Evelyn rode along, awkward in the third seat in a coat worth more than the bus. She finally asked the question, "Why the bus, Mom? I could have taken you 100 easier ways." Miriam patted her daughter's knee with a gloved hand. "Your father is at the end of this route," she said. "And the whole rest of our life is along the way. I wasn't riding away from you, Evie, I was riding back to us." Evelyn looked out the window at the shoe repair shop, still there, still crooked, and did not trust her voice for 3 full stops. These days Caleb is home by 4. One job. The braids are still abstract. On Sundays there is dinner in Miriam's kitchen, where she cooks and refuses help, and where some days she calls Ivy Evie, and Ivy answers to it without blinking, because Ivy decided a long time ago that love matters more than names. Some Tuesdays, Evelyn rides the 552 with them, learning by heart the route her parents rode back when they were young and broke and warm. The crayon sun hangs in a frame on the 40th floor, between the awards. Visitors ask about it. She tells them it is a picture of the most important thing that ever happened on Route 12. On a bright Tuesday in April, the 4 of them rode to the end of the line to visit Arthur. Miriam's hands were steady around the thermos lid. Ivy watched her for a long while, then leaned into her father and said the last word on the whole long winter. "They remember now, Dad." Nobody had to ask what she meant. Thank you for staying until the balance was restored. The people who watch to the end are the ones who understand why the ledger matters. If this story stayed with you, the videos on your screen right now are ready to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, the ledger has your name. Hidden Ledger. Every account settles.